Well, good morning, world. I'm back again, and today I am just going to quickly go over a few little nice things I've got in my Beatles collection. Now, I have been through my Beatles collection before, but I've added to it lately. And I just wanted to single out a couple of albums in here. One of my favourite albums is this one with the Beatles. Okay, this is a mono copy. I think it's a second pressing. It doesn't have the sold in the UK text on the label. It does have the gramophone company. It's a white and yellow label. It said in the Record Collector magazine something about a large mono on the sleeve. I don't know whether that counts as a large mono, but it's certainly an E&J Day sleeve. Is it E&J or is it Garrett and Lofthouse? Yeah, it's E&J Day. It's nearly ripped there, but yeah, it's a flip back sleeve, as you can see as well. Yeah, it is. It does play quite well. Being mono in the 60s, as it were, sort of one of the things about mono albums is that the grooves were physically different from stereo grooves. Okay, mono records from the 60s and before, as it were, really needed a larger stylus tip point to play them properly, as it were. I think I'm right in saying, although I do get this wrong, so if I've got it wrong then politely correct me, but I think a mono stylus will track a groove from left to right, okay, i.e. it's lateral tracking, okay. Obviously, a pickup arm would therefore sort of only travel in that lateral direction. Okay, a stereo arm will track up and down and left and right. Okay, so if you played a stereo record on an old mono record player with an arm that could only move in one plane, which I think is the horizontal plane, then you would knacker your record. Okay. Also, that sort of physically larger stylus tip would also knacker a stereo record. Okay, whereas a mono record being played with a stereo cartridge and stylus point won't knacker it, but what it will do is it will read parts of the groove that weren't meant to be read, as it were, and that would just be filled with noise. Okay, and so therefore, really, when playing a mono album, certainly an old-fashioned mono album, what one really needs is a mono cartridge that kind of cancels out any sort of extraneous groove noise that you're getting. Okay, either that or a mono switch on your amplifier, which also cuts out any of the sort of extraneous noise, but doesn't do it quite so well as a mono cartridge. Okay, so this is a mono copy. I also think that one of the issues with playing sort of albums, original pressings, as it were, from the 60s and prior to that, is that they hadn't entirely agreed on EQ curve settings. Now, thing is, for a record to kind of give faithful tonal reproduction, what manufacturers do when they master a copy is boost the treble and reduce the bass, so that the treble has a chance of because treble grooves are physically smaller again, and it just kind of evens them out a little bit, so that then the amplifier will correct the actual tonal balance. Okay, it's just a way of getting decent treble onto an album. Now, as I say, sort of prior to modern times, i.e., probably you're talking mid to late 60s going on the 70s, but even sort of late 60s, there were variances. They hadn't actually standardized that EQ curve. Nowadays, it's called the RIAA curve, and I've spoken about it before a few years ago. Yeah, I mean, I actually am quite aware, really, that EMI's own sort of proprietary EQ curving is not quite the same as RIAA, because what actually comes out of here is actually quite bright. It's not overly so, okay, but coupled with that noise, it does make tracks like It Won't Be Long sound like they're playing in a frying pan, because It Won't Be Long, for example, has this sort of very prominent hi-hat cymbal on it, and also the bass is slightly curtailed. In fact, actually, there isn't huge amounts of bass on here at all. Okay, now yesterday I found a stereo with the Beatles, and here it is. Okay, now the stereo mixes, obviously, they'll play on any kind of modern stereo equipment and read the groove as it's meant to be read. But it's because in ye days of yore, when people were prioritizing mono releases as such over the stereo ones, so therefore it was the mono mixes that had to be great, and the stereo ones were just like an added bonusy sort of thing. EMI and in particular Parlophone, who were a bit of a sort of way out label, they weren't sort of EMI's main priority subsidiary, as it were. But they were sort of a little bit behind the times, and they didn't have 4-track recording, which a lot of other studios had at the time, so they recorded this on 2-track tape. Okay, and what George Martin did in order to get a satisfactory mono mix was to record the instruments on one track of the 2-track tape and the vocals on the other. Okay, simply because that meant that you could just delay the moment slightly when you had to balance the vocals out with the instruments. Gave you a little bit more sort of leverage with with your balancing, what this meant for the stereo edition was actually just that all the instruments were on the left and the vocals were on the right, until we get some money for some reason where the vocals are in the centre and it sounds a little bit more sort of normal, as it were. Okay, so yeah, what you're getting with the stereo edition, you can sort of analyse the instruments slightly better that are in there. Okay, this record also has a fair bit more bass to it. Okay, its treble is not as peaky as my mono with the Beatles. The only issue being that the mono with the Beatles sounds exciting, and you can imagine why teenagers got themselves into such a tizzy in the 60s through listening to that mono version. It's powerful because all the instruments are coming as a much more integrated whole. Okay, yeah, it is slightly brighter. So what we need really is with the Beatles that is sort of has the bass and has a tad more treble and has the integration. Now this one, I'll let you into a secret. This one is the only vinyl Beatles that I've got that is a modern 2009 remaster. Okay, as I say, you know, it's very present and alive, but it's a tad civilized. You know, when Paul McCartney sings "All My Loving," for example, you know, it is quite breathtaking, really, having Paul McCartney there alone in the right-hand side speaker. You know, it's real and it's present and it's there. It's just not exciting. You know, and similarly, a track like "Till There Was You," which, you know, sounds great even in the mono version that I've got. You know, the mono version I've got is not too crackly. It's just a lot of surface noise on it. You know, and it does, you know, it does play nicely. You know, for you know, given, as I say, the fact that it's a 60s album that's, you know, playing on a slightly different sort of, you know, to slightly different sort of industrial, you know, vinyl standards from today. Okay, so what I'm wondering really, you know, and this is something that I'm tempted by, folks, you know, me being the non-capitalist that I am, I'm still hankering after the new mono box set of Beatles albums. Obviously, that doesn't include Abbey Road and Let It Be, which were only released in stereo. But yeah, these earlier recordings, I think, really benefit, or would benefit, from having you know, a modern pressing with that's optimized to play on modern equipment. Okay, now Hi-Fi World in the last few months have done a few sort of features on this new mono box set that's been released, and one of the things that Noel Keywood, who's the sort of editor-in-chief, as it were, of Hi-Fi World, went to Abbey Road and said, well, look, you know, how's about, you know, what do you think about a proper mono cartridge that is perfectly tweaked to play Beatles records in mono, you know, your new remasters, you know, in mono, and they liked it. Okay, and then he went to Autophon and suggested to them that they took their 2M Black cartridge. Now, the 2M Black is a modern moving magnet cartridge. It's a very well-respected moving magnet cartridge. I think it's a cut above my Exact, certainly more expensive than my Exact. And what Noel Keywood suggested was to tip that with you know, a mono version of the cartridge tipped with a modern stylus tip, as in like a Shibata Groove, which I think is the same as the what's it, as the stereo version. Okay, but, you know, just playing in mono. And there is now a 2M mono, which is said to play these mono records absolutely perfectly. Okay, obviously a very good hi-fi kind of stereo record deck will play mono records, you know, to the best of its capabilities, and a modern pressing of, you know, some of these vintage albums hopefully would also you know, hopefully the RIAA thing would be sorted out as well, you know, so that you are actually getting a proper balance. I know that these mono pressings of the album are from the analog tapes, they're not from the 2009 remasters. These stereo ones are from the 2009 remasters, possibly hence their slightly different balancing. I don't think that they sort of tweak the balancing that much, you know, and the EQ. But yeah, I mean, you know, it would just be nice to be able to hear these albums, you know, as they were meant to be heard. Okay, now, so yeah, if anyone wants to chuck me the money to buy a mono box set, then do feel free, okay? Because I think that would be interesting to hear, and even to play on a stereo cartridge, okay? You won't knacker the album by playing it on a stereo cartridge, because as I say, you know, the modern mono editions of, you know, all sort of vintage albums, you know, if they've been repressed, you know, in the last few years, then they will be you know, essentially a mono master pressed into a stereo micro groove album, okay? You know, and even, you know, an album from the 60s, you won't knacker by playing on modern equipment, provided that it's, you know, not scratched to high heaven, you know. And by and large, the vinyl in those days was much more. I can't take in but many words at once. Oh, shut up, Siri. My phone's sitting on my desk recharging, and it's and Siri's just decided to cut in. So anyway, yeah, I mean, what am I saying? You know, the vinyl in those days was thicker and more resilient than you know, certainly vinyl from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You know, I've got albums from the 50s that play absolutely beautifully. You know, and yeah, you won't knacker your stylus, you won't knacker your record, provided that it's in fairly good condition and doesn't jump. Okay, so yeah, that's my With the Beatles. The other album that I've got, which I've only played twice, I found this. I think I found it in an antique shop. This is a collection of Beatles oldies, but goldies, okay? This is an overlooked compilation. Now, you see, the Beatles were kind of under a huge amount of contractual obligation. Their first recording contract required them to produce, I think it was 6 singles a year and 2 albums. Okay, by 1966, they were absolutely knackered. They were spending far longer sort of making songs in the first place. I think, you know, compared to a single like Please Please Me and Ask Me Why, which was a couple of afternoons in production, as it were, Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, which were, you know, recorded towards the end of 1966. I mean, I think, you know, they took about 5 or 6 days each, you know, to make them. So it's certainly taken them longer because of, you know, exploring new technology and whatnot, and wanting to create, you know, sort of groovier new sounds and things. Plus they were knackered, they'd stopped touring, and they couldn't produce in the same sort of volume as their contract would, you know, was obliging them to. So in 1966, for the Christmas market, this was produced, okay? And it's interesting. Yeah, it's a compilation of stuff that, you know, fans had heard before, okay? And normally singles didn't go on albums. Okay, there are a few albums that contain single releases from them, but by and large, the Beatles preferred to keep their singles for singles and their and have, you know, LP tracks for LP tracks, and so this is a collection of some of the singles, some of the LP tracks that have been the most popular. Okay, and what's interesting about it as such is that it would have been the first time that some of the songs that were singles had their stereo mixes. Okay, and because this is the stereo version of the album, yeah, there'll be the mono version, which would have obviously the mono mixes on it. This has got the stereo mixes. Okay, and by and large, this album is balanced to be a lot warmer than the songs than I've actually ever heard, to be honest. You know, certainly, you know, compilations from the 70s, like the Red and Blue double album sets, seem to have quite a hot balance to them. You know, this is, you know, nice and warm. Okay, there's no peaky trebles. Bass is just a little bit soft and cuddly, but bass is there. You know, compared to, you know, With the Beatles, for example, a mono with the Beatles that I've got. You know, there's, you know, very little bass to speak of. Oh, and I'm going over my thing. I need to bung my password in, beg your pudding. Okay, so let's just have a quick run through the tracks. She Loves You, okay, had only had a single release up to that point, therefore it needed a stereo mix. The problem with She Loves You, which didn't exist with other Beatles singles, was that for some reason or other the original 2-track was destroyed, and so therefore they had to make a kind of fake stereo from it. So She Loves You is actually in fake stereo, and I think I read somewhere, I think it was in the Beatles recording sessions, I think what they did was basically completely slashed the treble on one side and completely boosted it on another, so it basically sounded, you know, really sharp and bright in one speaker and really boomy and bassy in the other. Actually, the overall effect to me is that it just sounds like it's sort of in the centre and to one side. Okay, and you know, you certainly don't get a nice sort of stereo spectrum of instruments. Okay, you don't even get vocals on the left and instruments on the right, or whatever it is, the other way around, I think. It's also because they made a German version of She Loves You round about the same time, a little bit later, and actually that's got a proper stereo mix, and it's a different track, okay, because they obviously had to remake it for the German market, okay. So yeah, there's She Loves You. From Me to You, okay, again, this would have been the first time that From Me to You would have had a stereo mix, because it was a single. The main difference between the stereo and the mono mixes are that with the stereo one, they forgot to put the harmonica da 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 bit at the beginning. Okay, so you can just hear the voices and the instruments, but and the sort of and the guitars and drums and whatnot, but not the harmonica at the beginning of that one. Okay, We Can Work It Out would have. Also, I think would have been the first time that had appeared in stereo, because that was Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out. That was a single, but that had not been on an album, so that would have been that one's first stereo mix. Okay, it's actually not a bad stereo mix, to be honest. Help would have had a stereo mix before, as would have Michelle and Yesterday. Okay, I Feel Fine, this would have been the first time that I Feel Fine would have been mixed in stereo, because that was a single from 1964, and again, it's a good mix. You know, there's none of this sort of odd kind of sort of instruments on one side, vocals on the other. You know, it's you know, it's actually good. Because they were recording in 4-track at the time, you could have a certain kind of spread of instruments around the stereo spectrum, but because it's only 4 tracks, you'd have, you know, maybe more than one instrument playing on one track, which kind of, you know, scrunched instruments together. So you might get a drum kit and you know, guitars here and a bass guitar there and a vocal there and another and sort of, you know, 3 people singing there, which kind of, you know, it's not, you know, a properly full balanced stereo, but it's certainly very nice. Okay, Yellow Submarine, that had a stereo mix before. The mono Revolver that I've got actually has Yellow Submarine. It sounds blooming awful. It's you know, really compressed to the 9s and whatever, and it's just blooming awful. I don't know whether or not that's just my pressing of it. Yeah, again, somebody buy me the mono box set and I'll tell you whether or not it's actually just my pressing of it or whether or not it's actually the mix. Okay, Can't Buy Me Love, that would have had a stereo mix before, because it was an album track. Bad Boy, I actually love this song, and I love the Beatles version of it as well. Someone with the surname Williams. Is it Larry Williams or something like that? Jolly good song, really like it. Yeah, it's about the only original kind of EP track that I've actually got, to be honest. I've got the past masters in stereo on CD, which has got the new remasters of them, and it's quite good. I do like it. It's, you know, it is like having a band playing in front of you, and I think round about, you know, sort of 64, 65, you know, the mixes and everything is really getting into its stride, and, you know, just some absolutely superb recordings came out of it, and this one is one of them. I really like it. I don't know whether or not it will be the first time it had a stereo mix here, because I'm not quite sure what the protocol was for releasing EPs. I don't know whether they release stereo and mono versions of the EPs or not, and maybe it's something I ought to check out. Okay, Day Tripper, that would have been its first stereo mix, I think. Hard Day's Night, that would have had a stereo mix before. Ticket to Ride, that would have also had a stereo mix before. Paperback Writer, I think, would have been its first stereo mix here. Sounds jolly good on this album because it's slightly warmer. You're getting a bit more impact to the bass, and, you know, this was you know, one of the things that the Beatles have been bemoaning was the fact that on American records they seem to have better bass than English pressings, and I think it was partly to do with, you know, typical British sense of reserve, not wanting the stylus to jump out of a cheap record player. But I think they found ways around it by this point. And so, yeah, Paperback Writer was one of the first tracks to benefit from, you know, decent bass, and, you know, this kind of warmer pressing, and all the tracks have been treated in the same way, because when you release a compilation album, you do kind of try and make the EQ and stuff a bit uniform, and, you know, Paperback Writer's good because it's, you know, it's nice and bassy, which is what it wanted to be. Eleanor Rigby, that would have had a stereo mix before, and then I Want to Hold Your Hand, which I think was one of the first Beatles songs to be recorded onto 4-track. Certainly the first Beatles single to be recorded onto 4-track, but its first stereo mix here, and they've actually been quite creative with it, and there's certainly, you can hear guitars sort of playing off, some over here, some over here. Listen to sort of some of the doo, 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 and you can hear them sort of pinging across from one side to the other, and it's actually quite good. Yeah, here endeth my little review of a collection of Beatles oldies but goldies, and a little sort of exploration of with the Beatles. You know, I just this whole Beatles thing is becoming a bit of a minefield, really, and it would just be nice to have, you know, decent mono and stereo copies of them all, and I actually haven't. You know, I've got, you know, quite a lot of gaps in my collection. For example, I've never heard a stereo for sale. I haven't got an original for sale. I've got a 1980s vinyl version of the first CD that was put out. Okay, sounds all right. Sounds okay. It's mono, and yeah, it's good. But yeah, I think possibly the new remasters are better, and certainly the mono ones, because they're taken, the mono vinyls are taken directly from the analog tapes. The stereo ones aren't, they're taken from the digital versions of the tapes, and so yeah, you know, let's have a mono box set. I'm not really scrounging from you, but I think one day, I think that'll be one of my purchases, or at least, you know, you can get them separately, and I might try and build them up as time goes by, and I will keep you informed. Okay, all right, thank you, bye.